I'm Bud Lopez. I'm the Tribal Agricultural Extension Agent for McKinley County. I've just started in the last couple of months. I'm originally from Gallup. I got my degree in horticulture from New Mexico State University. And for the last 30 years, I've lived out in California and worked in America's Salad Bowl, the Salinas Valley. Decided to come back to New Mexico, and so here I am. And I'm looking forward to trying to share what I know about this stuff with you. And our timing's I'm afraid, a little bit late, but I think we can still probably do everything that I've discussed in this program. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be talking about winterizing the garden and fall planting. Why we winterize. The main goal is to protect your soil from the harsh conditions it must endure in the winter. In particular, wind erosion. You know how it is in the spring. It just, your whole yard blows to Albuquerque many times. And so what you're trying to do is get it prepared for spring by increasing nutrients and getting you a head start on that starting to break down and working with the soil microbes in the winter time, so it's ready to go in the spring. So we're going to talk about, as I said, winterizing. We're going to talk about annual plant removal, which is reference to the plants that grew in the garden this summer. At this point, I'm specifically talking about vegetable gardens. We'll talk about a little bit about perennial gardens at the end of the session here that we're talking about winter planting. We're going to talk about weeding and how we can save ourselves a lot of work by doing it in a timely manner. We'll talk about soil amendments and when to add, how to add. We'll also discuss whether you're gonna do a no-till or a till garden. We'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that, of both. We'll talk about mulching. We'll talk about how we keep our mulch from blowing to Albuquerque. And we're going to talk about what to do with our tools in the spring, in the winter time after we're done using them. All right, annual and vegetable removal. In your annual and vegetable gardens, remove all the dead and dying annual plants. You want to get it away from the garden because in many cases, for instance, with your zucchini and that type of thing, you tend to have mildew. You just can't get away from it. So you want to take those plants, those leaves that are infected with the mildew, the spores are still there, and if you don't remove them, you can introduce it back into the garden for the next season. You also will be able to remove some pests' eggs that are laid on the foliage and overwinter there in the duff or the dead plant material. In some cases, you can cut right off at the soil level, cut the foliage off at the soil level and leave the roots, because this can actually help decrease erosion because it's holding the soil together. And as they decompose, they will add the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and some of the micronutrients back into the soil. If you're going to do a till, you still can that'll just chew them up and add them, let them stay in the soil, and they'll also break down and help with nutrients. Dispose of the material by bagging it, and preferably in black plastic, and leave it in the sun somewhere until you can get it off property or dispose of it some other way. The black plastic with our sunny days can help sterilize everything that's in there, including the killing the eggs and the spores from the funguses will die, and then you can avoid reintroducing. All right, we talked about weeding. As I mentioned, if it's done in a timely fashion, in other words, when they actually start emerging, if you can get those weeds either hula hoed, if you don't know what a hula hoe is, it's basically a hoe that's got a sharp edge on it, and you kind of just cut them off at their knees, at the soil surface. It's important to do it before they go to seed, because you're just going to be introducing another crop of seed in your garden if you don't get them early. Especially this year, after we had those great rains at the end of the season, I'm sure you probably got a whole bunch of good weeds coming up. And it's good to do it at the time they're germinating, not after they've gone to seed. And with these, with established weeds, these little seedlings like I have in the picture here, you can just cut those off with a hula hoe and they probably won't come back. Oh, thank you, Carol. Yes. Poop, plants out of place. That's what weeds are. Anyway, but if you have large established weeds, you're going to want to try to get the root out too, because many of our common weeds are perennial and can come back from the roots if you don't get rid of them. For instance, dandelions and that kind of thing. Common perennial weeds like bindweed, burdock, dandelion, dock, plantain, thistle, and ragweed, and some of the weed grasses are also will come back. It's paramount to remove the seed heads, even if they have ripened and opened. There are always straggler seeds that hang out in the flower mechanism that eventually goes away. But you want to get as much seed out of your beds as possible. Then you want to contain it and dispose of it, as we mentioned. I put a link in here for the spruce.com place that it talks about perennial weeds, and it's a good article if you can visit that and read what they have to say. All right, the next step is you're going to, once you get the weeds out of there, you're going to want to do your soil amendment. It's always a good idea to know what your soil is made up of. So I actually suggest that you actually have it sent to a reputable lab and have it tested for organic material, its nutrient levels, and that gives you a big head start on how you're going to amend your soil to make it better and make it work for you this next season. If at the end of the presentation, I've got all my information listed, and you can either email me or give me a call, and I can let you know who we use as a lab and how to go about doing it. It's a little convoluted how to get your soil to them, but they're very good, and it's very reasonable as far as price goes. I think it's for basically a full breakdown, you can, and it's very easy to read, and they give recommendations if you want them, and it's about $55. In our area, most soils are low in organic matter, and adding matter like compost will improve almost any, I'm not going to say almost any, it will improve all soils. It will increase the water holding capacity of sandy soils and improve nutrient content. It'll also improve the drainage in clay soils. So regardless of the type of soil you have, adding organic material is a good thing. A rule of thumb, in poor soils, you'll want to add 2 to 3 inches to the surface, and then you have to decide whether you're going to till or no till. That's going to be your next question you need to answer. Soil amendment. Soil amendment is any substance which is intended to change the chemical or physical characteristics of the soil These include plant-based compost, animal waste compost, and then mineral-based amendments. The picture on the upper left is the plant-based compost, then obviously the manure, and then the one to the right is mineral, and that's actually perlite. It doesn't have much in the way of nutrient availability to the plants, but what it does is it increases water infiltration and holding capacity and airflow in the soil, or aeration. Components of compost. Plant-based amendments can include green waste, leaves, and humus. It has available nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. In addition, it has carbon and many of the micronutrients that are necessary for a good garden. Animal waste-based amendments can come from cattle, sheep, chicken, and rabbit. They all have a good supply of available NPK and some micronutrients. Now, chicken and rabbit tend to have higher nitrogen than the other ones, and they can also be what they call hotter. So you have to be a little more careful with those, especially if they haven't cooked long enough. Mineral-based amendments, as I mentioned, like vermiculite and or perlite, are added to soil to aid in aeration and water retention. This encourages high microbial activity, which in turn really aids in the structure rebuilding of the soil, especially if you till. Commercial compost can be a combination of all of those that you buy in a bag, and they have their own formulas, and that's where, when you know what kind of soil it is, you can decide what combination or what type of amendment you want to introduce into your garden. Now, we talked about tilling and no tilling. The tilling and turning, and I say turning, which I mean just in there with a shovel and kind of scooping it up and turning it over and getting the amendment down, 4 to 6 inches. And tilling is actually using a tilling apparatus, a machine to grind everything up, and that's going to talk about the disadvantage of that in a minute. But the advantages include aeration and loosening of the soil. It also helps to incorporate amendments more quickly to the depth where it's needed, down where the roots of the plants are going to be. Tilling, turning disadvantages includes the disruption of the soil structure. In other words, it's a, when I say structure, it's like a building block. It's like like a chimney of bricks. You go in there, and then when you till it all up, all those bricks separate. Those little bricks, those building blocks, are the microbes and the nematodes and all those things that create the population under the surface of the soil that do so many things for plant growth, including having good drainage and water retention and all of the other things above and below. They also, of course, are responsible for breaking down the organic material to make those nutrients that are in the organic material, the compost, available to the plants for growing. It also redistributes and accelerates the decomposition of the organic material and makes it unavailable. It takes it away from the microbes, which they need to accomplish their nutrient cycle and create that structure I was referring to. And doing it year after year after year, it just creates a vicious cycle, and you tend to it just makes the soil worse every time. So my recommendation is, if your soils are really bad and you need to get organic material in there quicker, and for the current seasons, you go ahead and till and introduce the compost maybe a couple of years, but do it, do it gently. I don't know how to put it, but do it as gently as possible. And then once you get the organic material into your basically inert soils, and you can start getting these microbe communities going, you will be able trade off and go back to doing the no-till or going to the no-till, where you basically just top treat it with amendment, and then let it work its way in from the soil surface as it breaks down. And then again, no-till advantages include lower costs for soil prep, which means you're not paying for gasoline for the tiller. I know you're doing it yourself, but your time is valuable. It encourages microbial vitality by not disrupting it when you till. It maintains a strong soil structure, combats climate change in that you're not burning fossil fuels to till it, and it also doesn't expose the carbons and that it doesn't volatilize the carbons that go into the atmosphere by tilling, and eventually your yields will increase to a very, very nice standard. Often after time, I've seen some instances where it's taken people a decade of no-till to get their yields up to what they were when they were tilling, but they do come back and they do exceed those at some point. No-till disadvantages include the possible increase in chemical use due to the absence of tilling. You're not tilling in the weeds in, and so and destroying the weeds, so you get those popping up all over the place. But again, when you till, that introduces seed to germinate at the surface also. So it's kind of half dozen to one, to be honest with you. The learning curve is steep, and it takes time for the farmer to gain the knowledge and the skill to justify its use for satisfactory yields. In other words, as we said, it's kind of hit and miss, it's experimentation and everything else, and it takes time. Some land use can be limited due to the types of soil and single-use restrictions of the no-till. In other words, it's difficult to rotate crops with doing no-till. You have to kind of stick to the same crop in order to make it work. The next step in winterizing is that if you till in particular, you're going to want to put a mulch layer over the material applied. The reason for applying mulch include one or all of the following: conservation of soil moisture. In other words, just like any other mulch in your garden, it's going to maintain the soil in the soil the moisture in the soil surface. Again, improving soil fertility. It helps. It aids in insulating and letting the compost decompose and release its good juice into the soil. Improving soil health, aid in weed suppression, and enhance visual appeal. Now, with the no-till, I wanted to mention that many of the mulches the amendments you might use also act as the mulch. So if you put 3 or 4 inches of good compost over your no-till soils, the trick for that is you just need to move to the next step, and that's securing it so that it doesn't blow away. Mulch can include many organic and inorganic materials. Many serve as amendments and stabilizers. Some examples are in organic are yard waste, grass clippings, leaves from your deciduous trees. Then there's compost that's already been decomposed, and that's what I was referring to, is when you put that on your no-till, a good compost, you'll need to, you don't necessarily need to put another layer of mulch over the top of that. You can, but you not necessarily need to. You can use permeable covers on that to keep it in place and keep it working into the soil. There's hay and straw. Hay and straw are okay. They do a good job of protecting and insulating and keeping weeds down, but often they don't break down quick enough to where you can just leave them there and plant into them. You'll need to pull it back and plant the spring after you've pulled it back from the soil. Wood chips, again, the same thing. They're big and they don't break down as quickly. So those may need to be pulled back to when it's time to plant. And then there's bark, the same thing. But they all accomplish the goal of, you know, keeping your soil, your good soil, from blowing away. Then there's the synthetic mulch types. There's landscape fabric, stones, rock, and gravel, which in vegetable gardens, you know, gravel and rock and stones probably aren't something you want to do, because obviously those have to be removed at the beginning of next season. The most important part in our area, especially because of the soil's dry out typically and our winds are relentless. I mean, they just are crazy. You want to stabilize the mulch with anything that will prevent wind erosion and yet allow moisture infiltration. So for instance, you can get old cardboard in the age of Amazon. I think everybody has cardboard. I like to use bird netting, especially if I'm using bark chips and that kind of thing as my mulch. Bird netting it's invisible, and yet it keeps everything from blowing away. And it can be reused. I'm going to go through all this. Shade cloth, again, it's another one that the water can get through, which is very nice when it does snow or rain. I've seen people use old bed sheets, you know, that have torn or stained and they can't use them anymore. And then burlap, which is all relatively inexpensive stuff. Cardboard and newspapers, they can be laid over your mulch to prevent wind from blowing your mulch away. It breaks down quickly, and newspaper in particular can be incorporated into your soil. It's cheap, in other words, free. Here's the bird netting I referred to. It's nylon, I guess, and you can see those. They come in different diameters. Some are 1 inch, some are ½ inch, and depending on what your mulch you're trying to contain, the size of it is how you decide that. It can be reused for several seasons. Shade cloth and weed fabric kind of work the same way. There's more light infiltration in the shade cloth. Believe it or not, the name kind of is misleading. The weed fabric is specifically made to prevent its weave is so tight that the weeds can't grow through it, and that's why they call it weed fabric or landscape fabric. It can be used year after year. It works well if your mulch is fine textured and prone to blow away, and moisture can get through precipitation. Old bed sheets, again. If you have smaller areas and you have, you know, all these old sheets that you were going to tear up and use as rags anyway, there you go. Burlap, same thing. It's pretty cheap. It comes in rolls, sacks, and sheets. It also can last more than one season. Now, I put this in here only because it does have a place in some worlds, not mine, but black plastic can be put over it, and in some cases it can work as a soil sterilant, killing funguses and insects, larvae and eggs, but I just prefer not to use it. But it does have its place. The advantages: weed control, prevent wind erosion, easy to work with, it's inexpensive. Disadvantages: no water, not biodegradable, and can cause runoff issues. In other words, if you have a good downpour, instead of soaking into the ground, it just runs off, and it can cause, you know, it can cause you issues in other parts of your garden. Now, wind abatement, more wind abatement. For all of those things that you lay out over it, you need to secure it to the ground so it doesn't blow away itself. And I put a few things out here that work pretty well. On the left are just landscape, they call them staples, and you just hammer those in the ground through the bird netting or the landscape fabric or the shade cloth. Old tires, you just lay them on the corners and then periodically along the shake cloth again and whatever you've got covering it. And then good old fashioned rocks, as you can see to the right, just securing your cover. Now, the next portion of this is going to be about what to do with your irrigation and your tools in the wintertime and how you can protect them. They're expensive, and you don't want them getting ruined by bad weather, rust, and freezing and thawing temperatures. After one last good soaking in the garden, you want to remove the nozzles from the hoses and drain all the hoses. I prefer you to store mine indoors somehow out of the sunlight, because the sun can break down those rubber hoses pretty quickly if you're not careful. Automatic system controllers, if you have an automatic irrigation system, should be turned off. If possible, loosen end caps on the end of all the irrigation lines, especially if you have a drip system. And if you can, try to blow the water out of the system. Most people don't have an expensive air compressor where they can blow the water out of their system, but most people do have a shop vac or one of those wet dry vacs that you can put the hose on the exhaust side of it and blow the water through your lines with your vacuum cleaner. Tools should always be clean, get mud and all that off of it. And I like to spray a thin coat of WD-40 and wipe off excess and give it a nice little coat of WD-40 to store over the winter. That prevents rust. And then the next part of the whole thing is fall is for planting. I've always found, and I'm backed by a lot of horticulturists, especially in this area, that plants are better. For instance, I'm talking about nursery owners and that type of thing. Plants are much better off in the ground in the winter than they are sitting in the nursery, you know, with a couple of hay bales trying to protect them from the harsh conditions. So anyway, contrary to popular belief, plants do grow in the winter. If the soil temperature is above 36 degrees, and often we'll have a warm spell where that is how it is, and the soil is actually even warmer than that, roots will continue to grow and develop, and that's what you're looking to do by planting in the fall. Planting nursery stock that is dormant and has been hardened can be better for the plant. Like I said, being in the ground during a harsh winter is better than a pot above ground. And a dear friend of mine, horticulturist, also in the business for 40 years, has said, if you can dig, you can plant trees, shrubs, and perennials late into the fall. So in other words, if the soil isn't frozen, you can plant. One of the best times to plant fruit trees is in the fall. And late fall is okay too. We're getting almost to the point, if we don't warm up for a little bit, it might not be a great idea, but I think I would still risk it, especially if you get the trees and shrubs and perennials from a nursery in the area that they've had that hardening period and they are used to the colder temperatures. I wouldn't go shopping in Albuquerque and bring the trees over here to do it. They're just not hardened off enough. Anything that's hardy, although our zonal map has changed a little bit over the last 20 years, when I was working in New Mexico, we were here a hard zone 5, possibly a 4A, I mean a 4B. But now we're closer to a 5A, I mean a 5A, 5B, and in some areas even a 6A, which you can see the temperature, the low temperature extremes for those zones. So that's another thing, you need to know what your zone is where you live, so that you can decide what to plant, what's hardy and what's not hardy. Often people, you know, within the same plants like cherries and peaches and whatever, the varieties have a much different tolerance for cold. So you have to make sure the variety you're choosing can handle the cold temperatures. Anyway, apples, plums, cherries, peach, pears, figs, all lend themselves to fall planting. Planting considerations. When you do plant, especially fruit trees, and for that matter, I'll talk about that again next to the next one. When fall planting, as I said, you want them to make sure they're climatized to the current temperatures. Amend the planting hole as usual with organic material, and after many years of doing native plant propagation and restoration projects, I found that a little bit of soil moist, which is a polymer in your soil amendment that you put in the hole, goes a long way because it retains water. It doesn't get leached out of the polymer into the soil, but it is available to the tree root. The root can actually pull it out of the polymer, so it allows the tree to have water for a longer period of time. It's always good to heavily mulch, as you can see on the slide on the left. That is a good insulation layer and moisture retention. And then I like to, especially in our area where we do get below zero often, I would like to see people tree wrap their new trees in particular. That really will prevent getting frost-bitten bark and killing that outer layer of where the growing goes, and gives you a much better chance of success. Again, shade and ornamental trees, also good for planting in the fall. You can see there's lots of varieties, and within these families of trees, you need to make sure you're getting one that is cold hardy to this area, because there's a lot of maples out there. There's a lot of poplars, aspens, and cottonwoods, and all that are all in the poplar family. They all have different cold tolerances. Oaks, Mr. Ginkgo, he's an ancient. He can survive anything, so I highly recommend him. Sycamores, crabapples, birch, Kentucky coffee tree has emerged to be one of the nicest trees you can plant. Good shade, tough as nails, low water user. And then the dogwoods, if you're looking for ornamentals, like the flowering crabs and the dogwoods and the flowering plums and all those, all do well planted in the fall. Again, the same planting considerations for the ornamental trees and shade trees. Shrubs, again, a lot of them that are perfectly happy going into the ground in the winter time, or in the fall and winter. Boxwoods, red twig, dogwood, mahonia, viburnum, pyracantha, oak leaf, hydrangea, and many more. And again, other hydrangeas might not be as cold tolerant. So you need to make sure you know your zone. And when you choose the plant material, you want to make sure that you select one that's cold hardy for the area. Suitable evergreens for planting, almost all of them, arborvitae, silver fir, Colorado blue spruce, Doug fir, white spruce, white fir, Austrian pine, pinon pine. If you can, those are more difficult to transplant, but if you can get them in a pot from a nursery, they transplant fine. Ponderosa also. And I'm all for. I live up at Blue Water and have a completely weed-free property. There's no exotics in there, except for some autumn joy sedum that we introduced several years ago, but that's not a bad one. That's not poop. That's actually one we want. But anyway, I prefer using the native trees, which in that case would be the alligator juniper, the one-seed junipers, pinon, and we do have quite a bit of ponderosa there also. So I prefer the natives. Native propagation has always been my background, so I'm kind of into that, and it's probably because I'm lazy. Natives don't take as much work because they evolved to live here. Planting considerations for evergreens. It's also very important to mulch the planting area. In addition, now we used to use these on the central coast of California with our new trees, our new evergreens. We'd get severe 70-mile-an-hour winds also. And I don't know if you've ever seen some of the trees on the coast. They all are burned on the water side, and they all kind of lean into the land side, and the side that's on the land is doing fine, but they just burn everything from the wind side of the tree. We started using a wilt proof, which is not organic, but it's very, very innocuous. But what it does is you spray it on the evergreens, and it slows down respiration from the tree so that the winds don't blow the vapor layer and the moisture in the leaves or the scales or the needles, whatever you happen to be planting. Keeps them hydrated so that they don't die. And we use them in the nursery for Christmas season too. We spray cut Christmas trees with them, and it makes them last a lot longer. Perennials and bulbs. All perennials that are rated zone 5 or lower can be planted in the fall. Fall bulbs can be planted if it's done soon, and I'm referring to us right now. We're getting a little bit where the soil might be getting a little bit cold for them, but most of them will do just fine if you put them in now. And remember, it's 2 to 3 times the size of the bulb down, or the length of the bulb down. And I know you probably have heard this before, but you always need to make sure you're planting the root side down. I don't know how many times I've dug up tulip bulbs that people had planted the prior year, and they were dead, of course, but the tulip leaves were heading down, trying to get up, but they just couldn't do it. When you plant bulbs in particular, you want to get some, you can see the superphosphate in the bone meal. You can see the NPK on the high yield superphosphate. It's very high. The phosphorus is very high, which is very good for blooming and rooting. So that's why you want to put a tablespoon or so in the bottom of the hole you're putting your bulb in. And you want to stir it up a little bit. You don't really want that phosphorus or that bone meal in direct contact with the bulb. You want it mixed in with the native soil surrounding it, or the amended soil that you put in there. Now, this is imperative. This is the most important part of winter planting. You need to water in the wintertime, especially around here where it can get very, very dry. Because plants do use water when they're dormant. And if they get dry, that makes them much more susceptible to freezing and dying. So once a month, if we haven't had a really good snowfall that has melted, you really should water any new plantings that you put into the ground. So you're going to want to keep a water can, or you're going to want to keep a hose handy that you can pull out from the shed or whatever, and water, like I said, once a month at least, if we haven't had any precipitation. And then again, of course, put your hose away, drain it, and put it back. I know it's a challenge, but it's you'll be really happy in the spring when all these plants you planted show up. All right, that's kind of about all I have. Here's my contact information. And as I mentioned, if there's any specific questions, or if you need help getting your soil tested, please give me a call or email me at BUD. That's the letter L, not the number 1, Bud L2 at nmsu.edu. And that's what I got.
Thanks, Bud. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can go ahead and insert your question in the chat box. if they're unable to get a hold of you, Bud, to see where they can get their soil tested, do you have any other recommendations that they could use in order to get their soil tested in other
Yeah,
places?
sure. In fact, if you'll give me a second, I can verbally give you the website you can go to. That we use. We used, well, New Mexico State University used to have a soil testing lab. And they no longer do it. So hold on.
While you're putting that up, we have a question in the chat chat box.
Okay.
Stephanie, is it late for cover crops?
It is too late for cover crops. In fact, I was originally asked to do this webinar on that. And I, because of my lack of current experience in the area, I checked with several powers that be, and they said, you're probably not going to get much germination. Now, you could probably put the seed down and just wait for it to come in the spring, but you might as well not risk loss to weather, to the seed, and just do it in the spring. And I was just going to mention that I plan on doing one of these on cover crops for spring, and we'll do it in a timely fashion this time. Hopefully we can do it in February and give you guys some time to acquire seed and figure out what you're going to do. But let me search for that website. Okay, Cheryl has a question. Can you put tulip bulbs in a container, or is it better? You can, unfortunately, the soil, when the pots are above ground, they can get really completely frozen. So they may not make it through the winter. Okay, it's Ward's Laboratories. See if I can get it to come up. wardlab.com. And they can test tissue, a plant tissue. They can test your soils. They can do a lot of things. They can check for heavy metals. They can do all that stuff. But if you've grown in it before and it's not dying from too much heavy metals, and you're probably just going to want to get the soil tested to figure out what your organic material percentage is, and your any NPK and micronutrients. Just as a rule of thumb, a good growing soil, I understand, it should have between 3% and 6% organic material. Carol, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good base to shoot for. We don't have very much at all, so.
Yeah,
Then
that's
more than that would just be a bonus.
right. But that's even ours probably, we're probably down 1 or 2% in most cases, even in our forest areas where they haven't been touched. But anyway, okay. Any other questions?
Okay, so I have a question. So once we get the results of our soil and what is needed from it, I always see a lot of those soil amendments Miracle Grow that you see like
Right.
Depot and stuff. There's like a whole bunch of variety of them. How do you go about choosing like the right one that would suffice? I don't know. I mean, like there's so bunch of them, it's really hard to decide.
Well, like I said, what they'll do with your soil samples, or testing, they can give you recommendations about what you need to improve. And then that way you can decide what amendments and what, fertilizers, if you're going to use fertilizers, that kind of fertilizer, it'll help you decide. But like I said, until you know what your soil's doing, it's just trial and error. You know, you put something in, if it starts yellowing intravenously or extravenously, which means whether the vein in the leaves is yellow or the middle between the veins is yellow, depends on that. That indicates what you're deficient in. You can do it that way, but if you already know what's the soil is deficient in, and you can correct that before you even start growing the plants, that's the ideal.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Bud.
Uh-huh.
Well, you still have your hands raised. Do you still have another question? Stephanie said, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and end there. If there are no other questions in the chat box, we'll go ahead and go on to our announcements. Let's see. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and conclude our presentation from there. And if you guys have any questions about your soil amendment, Bud is more than willing to go ahead and discuss that with you. I'm gonna go ahead and release a polls here, and if you guys could please take a minute in filling that out, really appreciate it. Your feedback's really appreciated. But other than that, Bud, thank you so much for this presentation. Really appreciate a lot of people on here. I hope you guys learned a lot from it.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
thank
much
you,
for,
Bud and
for
Mickey.
asking me.
Thank
And
you.
please, if it's any questions you might have, please let me know.
Okay.
Not just in you know, in the reference to this presentation. That's my job.
Yep, so if you have any questions for him, his expertise are beyond this, only this webinar. So if you guys have a lot of questions for him, do shoot him an email and he'll get right back to you. But thank you again. And just to let you guys know that we do have a webinar next week that's on winter feeding program. So this will be presented by Marcy Ward. She is our NMSU livestock specialist. This will be on November 23rd, and most of our, well, all of our webinars start at 5:30 and around 6:30-ish. But just to let you guys know, this is registration is required for this. So if you want to head over to our website, which is nsa.nmsu.edu, you'll see all of our content there, from our upcoming events to who we are as a project, and some directory from McKinley County, San Juan, and Cibola counties. They're all, information is all up on there. We do conservation planning, so if that's something that you guys are interested in, do give us a call. Our contact information is there as well. We do have a Facebook page, just to update you all on our upcoming events, our webinars, and in-person events as well. So we're starting to get a gist of getting back on out to the open and meeting you guys face to face. So we're working on that as well. And like I said from the beginning, our webinars are recorded from start to finish. They'll be located on our YouTube channel. It's called the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project. So if you want to type that in the YouTube channel search box, it'll take you straight to it. We also have monthly newsletters that we send out every month. It has all the information from who we are, like I said, from the project, and what other upcoming events, our project partners, what type of events that they have in mind that's coming around the corner as well. Some USDA programs and their updates. So if you want to take a look at that, feel free. Let us know if you want to subscribe to our monthly newsletter. And thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you guys all next week.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
So the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project is a New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service initiative delivered in collaboration with two of our project partners. One of them is COPE, which is Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment. And the other project partner of ours is the Dene College Land Grant Office. So our project is funded by the USDA outreach and assistance for socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers and Veterans Farmers and Ranchers program. And an overview of our project, we aim to improve the operations, profitability, and sustainability of our farmers and ranchers, Veterans and Farmers and Ranchers program. We also encourage the increase of knowledge in the use of our USDA programs and services and those of other resource providers. And we also increase the local production and consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables and healthy food by Navajo families and individuals.